This is a production of Cornell University.
All right, everybody. Again, my name is Toni DiTommaso, and the lab that I work in or that I lead is called the Weed Ecology Lab and Management Lab. And as the name suggests, we study weeds, both in agronomic and in natural areas. So invasive species, we particularly focus on the biology, ecology of these species. And obviously, as you've probably saw in the news, invasive grasses have been a real issue with some of those fires, including the fire in Maui. So there's a lot of interest again on invasives and not necessarily just related to ag systems. Very varied research program, kind of all over the map, but I enjoy that. I really enjoy that. Again, you get an idea of some of the work that we've been involved in. Kind of a major focus over the last 5 years has been climate change, particularly weed distributions, and what are some of the traits of species that allow them to migrate, basically, or to move. And one, Johnson grass is one that growers here in New York are particularly concerned about. This is a species that's problematic in the South and mid-Atlantic states, but it has now moved into New York. It's here, it's been here a while, used to survive as an annual because the winters were too cold for the rhizomes to survive. But we're seeing that has changed with our winters being milder. So there's a lot of interest, and also with some in some of the work. And the latest work is on agrivoltaics, and that is basically these renewable solar farms. Some pushback by communities, and just some of you are working in this area as well, losing prime agricultural land. And some of this work just got some new funding from New York Ag and Markets, are very interested to see, can any crops be grown on some of these solar farms to at least alleviate the issue of taking off the market some valuable cropland. So if any of you are interested in kind of that area, we can talk more about that. Fairly large group, which is, I'm supposed to be on the downside, but this is amazing students. Again, you got to meet Linnea, Sophie, a whole bunch of folks. Natasha, I co-advised with Matt Ryan. And again, Sarah is our newest postdoc. Want to just mention he's going to be one of our seminar speakers, but does that last name should ring a bell to some of you. This is Uri Menayed's dad, Fabian, who's an agroecologist at Montana State University, is joining our lab for a sabbatical and is writing a book on edible non-crop plants, of which Sophie and I have contributed a chapter. But he'll be here, a great person to talk to, originally from Argentina, so has a lot to say there. With that, I do teach 2 courses. I should have put 2023 in there. Currently teaching a weed science course. We have close to 25 students, which is great. I also teach a graduate level course and co-teach an IPM, Integrated Pest Management course. This is for the graduate students that are out there and undergraduate. So with that, just ran out. So Dr. Vipan, your turn. Another weed science colleague.
Thank you, Tony. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vipan Kumar. I'm relatively a new faculty member here, a weed scientist, another weed scientist. My appointment is 60% research and 40% extension. So I'm just a 6-month old with Cornell. So I have not a lot more to say here, but a few things we have started here this summer. Just gonna tell about the projects we are started here in Cornell. So coming here at Cornell, we have started seeing issues with the herbicide resistance. And one of the species I have looked at this summer in the central New York is water hemp or common water hemp. So the picture you see here, these are the pictures we got from central New York, Cuyahoga County, Seneca County, as well Wayne County, where we have water hemp issues in field crops like soybean and corn. And some of these fields have been treated with the Roundup a couple of times. So definitely they are resistant to glyphosate. But my idea is to do a little survey in the state of New York for this species as well as other pigweed species, including palmer, including redwood pigweed, as well as the horseweed, to look at the resistance spectrum in the state of New York. So we have collected some lines here from central New York, and we're gonna screen this in the greenhouse this fall or spring. And we're gonna screen different herbicides, the commonly used herbicides, especially 2,4-D dicamba, glufosinate, which are very effective herbicide programs for controlling these pigweeds, to see if we have any issues with the resistance to those herbicides, along with glyphosate in water hemp. So as I said, this is again just a start of the program, and we have been collecting these water hemp. So we're going to collect more seeds of water hemp as well as other pigweeds from field crops in the state to see where we stand in terms of herbicide resistance in our weed population in the state of New York. I was looking at the herbicide resistant international survey, and state of New York has not documented any case since 1983. So that probably is not true. We have more cases of resistance here. So along with the resistance screening, my program is gonna actively looking at alternate herbicide options, what herbicides we can use to control these issues like water hemp or palmer amaranth or any other weeds. So we have started some field experimentation this summer, looking at some pre and post applied herbicide options in soybean as well as in corn. Along with these chemistries, we are also looking at the application technologies, what spray nozzle or spray volume we need to use for controlling these weed species. Because some of these new traits, especially in list soybean or extend soybeans, they specify some of those nozzles or spray volumes we need to use and how they can impact some of these weed control efficacy. So this is, again, a lot of work in the field this summer, and we have been looking at on-farm field studies as well, especially in central New York, especially on water hemp. What are those alternate options we have? Precision ag tools, just briefly, I have a graduate student here, Akhilesh, he's here on the back. He's looking at the precision agriculture tools, things like drones. He's trying to detect pigweed, especially water hemp in the field crops, using a machine learning approach, using different algorithms. And his interest lies in classification of weeds from the crops so that we can have a prescription map where we can use those precision sprayers. Along with those, we are collaborating with the other folks from the grow team, looking at different camera systems. The camera system on the picture here is, you see, this is a 3D camera looking at non-destructive way of measuring the biomass, the weed biomass. We've been collecting this and calibrating the algorithms. This is a group from USDA ARS in Maryland. So we're gonna do that, look at the 3D camera, how we can use those camera or sensors to estimate the weed biomass as well as the weed densities. Moving on the road, we also interested to look at the other non-chemical weed control tactics. The part of my startup has given me some money to buy this seed destructor. This is a impact mill we're gonna use in our field crops, especially in soybean, and gonna look at the destruction or the seed destruction or the pigweed seed destruction using this tool on the back of the combine. And we are thinking to integrate this mechanical way of weed control along with the cultural practice, such as a cover crop, how they can integrate together in helping us managing those resistant weeds. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. I'm Dan Katz. I'm an assistant professor here in soil and crop sciences, and I've been here for the last year and a half or so. My research focuses on the intersection of plant ecology and public health. There are a lot of health relevant interactions that we have with plants. One of the ones that I focus on in particular is allergenic pollen. Now, we don't have that much information about airborne pollen concentrations. And this is a problem because it prevents us from doing an effective job of providing people with forecasts and alerts, and it also prevents people from effectively managing their medication. And on a broader scale, we don't even fully understand what the health consequences of pollen exposure are. A lot of my work is to try and create these types of models through understanding things like where plants are, when they are reproducing and releasing pollen, how that pollen disperses through the air, and what the health effects of it are. I also am interested in other topics related to plant ecology and public health, and I'm working on a project now in New York City trying to understand whether particular trees are especially good at reducing temperatures during heat waves. And ultimately, what can we do to optimize the cooling effects of these trees, especially as heat waves become more and more of a problem in the future. So I thought I'd give you a little example of some of the types of work that I do. And this is a project that I did as a postdoc at the University of Michigan. And in this project, used a bunch of remote sensing to map individual trees, created allometric equations of how much pollen individual trees produced, and then combined these to calculate per tree pollen production across a large metro area. With that, created maps of pollen release, compared it with airborne pollen concentrations, and also included phenological models. So that's the type of thing that I do. And to do this type of work, I also end up drawing from a lot of different disciplines, including remote sensing, ecology, statistical modeling, little bits of citizen science here and there, and some engineering, as well as some epi work as well. So very broad ranging. And if you're interested in hearing more about any of these topics, or you have some interest in this kind of intersection of plants and public health, stop by, send me an email, or chat with Hannah. Thanks.
All right, so I'm Louis Longchamps. I'm an assistant professor of digital agronomy. So my program is trying to support farmers in their change process. And the idea is that if we want farmers to go from where they are today to sustainable agriculture, this involves a lot of change that will happen through experimentation and figuring it out on their farm, how to make it happen. How this can work when you think of how digital agronomy can support this is that we can help farmers by collecting and organizing the data, then doing those experiments in the field, interpreting and learning from those experiments, and then proceeding to evidence-based change through cycles of iteration, something that could look like a virtuous cycle that you build on every year. So if you those here are kind of the main line of my program, but each of those obviously will generate some research questions that need to be elucidated. So if you look at collect and organize data, we have one project that is just to get a hold of the the management data. So those data are everywhere, like in the notepad. Sometimes they are just in their head. So what we want to do is to invent a way that when the tractor enters a field, it triggers an interaction with a smart speaker or something like that. And then they record their data, and then it just shuts down, and then it goes directly in the database. Okay, so that's one example of project. We have another project here that when they are doing an experimentation, they can just highlight like where was the experiment on their farm, and then it automatically populates all the information for the weather, the topography, the soil type, remote sensing imagery. So now you can contextualize more and learn a bit more from that experimentation. Then after that, when we proceed to experiments, the kind of different and fun part here is that we let farmers experiment the way that fits with their business. Instead of asking them to do small plots, let them experiment as they experiment, and us adapt to that process. And then after that, very important component is to try to see how we can create value for the farmers to really learn from what they did and continue improving. And this was a workshop. And then after that, evidence-based. So this is how do we generate a cycle, a virtuous cycle of learning for not only selected farmers, but for a community of farmers that strive to become sustainable on their farm. So this involves a lot of work from social science, computer science, AI, agronomy, boots on the ground, and things like that. So we have a good team. Alex is working on a project trying to identify how dynamic curves of growth can help us better understand nitrogen. Phil is working on a project trying to see how we can populate, so what I showed just before, how we can populate automatically some databases. And so Fatih, she was working on one of the on-farm experimentation project. And we were lucky to have a bunch of interns and collaborators across Cornell, CIS, the CIDA, and Cornell Tech. So just a little bit.
Okay, so the general theme that draws my research program together is really using modeling to try and understand what we can do in agriculture, particularly soils, but not only soils, to mitigate climate change. So some of the things I've been doing, for example, are trying to get process-based models that actually represent how microbes turn over carbon in soils, which are much better than the traditional types of models we have there. Implementing those kind of models into Earth system models to actually get to ask big scale questions using these kinds of process understanding. Started to move a lot into using AI, evidential deep learning, and machine learning techniques to try and uncover some of the gaps in our knowledge about processes, and also to get better predictive models for actually planning trajectories for how we should manage the world going into the future. Oh, I think I've just killed the screen. There we go. Okay. So some of the projects I've done and recently are, for example, the top left, we can see some maps of soil carbon sequestration potential, which these were the ones which actually made up the projections of the recent IPCC sixth assessment report. And what we can see is, you know, the potential, if we do all we can with soils to sequester carbon, is only amounts to a relatively short amount of our emissions at the moment, which tells us two things. One, that we can't rely on it to offset emissions from other sectors. We need to decarbonize massively. And this could be a sort of another piece of the silver buckshot that we need to actually solve the problem, rather than a big answer in and of itself. Also, I look at sort of trade-offs between different technologies. We see between bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, and biochar in the left, showing that biochar actually has a niche role at allowing us to actually tackle climate change at much lower carbon prices than some of the other ways we might do it, but it might fall off later century as carbon prices escalate. Also got, this is a map from Ethiopia where I looked at a sort of large national survey of land restoration program to try and understand the mitigation potential within that. And the biochar there's a recent map which is just in review at the moment of trying to map out to very high resolution globally what we can do with agricultural residues to generate biochar. On track. And then some of the questions that I try to answer with these processes, with these models, are things like, is soil carbon sequestration actually a net source or sink of greenhouse gases, which is not actually clear yet. And what we find is actually really depends, that some systems in some places may be, other places may be a net source. And you really need to think about the whole system effects, life cycle analysis, soil emissions of other greenhouse gases, long-term impacts, and things like, you know, even reduced tractor passes may be more influential in the balance for no-till than the soil use carbon sequester. So looking at the whole big picture, and there's certainly potential to offset around 10% of our agricultural emissions, but not much more. Again, we can't use these processes to offset other sectors, just to help within agriculture. Last one just got accepted yesterday, so I'll go. I'll mention that, which is that we used a data from China, from tens of thousands of field trials, absolutely massive data set with some big machine learning models to try and tease out the question of how much soil carbon affects yield, and so therefore how much we could improve yield using soil carbon sequestration. Turns out, depends where, it's much better in drier areas than wetter areas. And overall, globally, it's only about less than 1% increase in crop yields that we could get from sequestering carbon. So not a huge co-benefit there. Thank you.
Thanks. Hi, Peter Woodbury. So I have broad interests in how can we improve the productivity of both agriculture and forest systems and improve the environmental performance. So soil quality, air quality. I use a variety of tools to get at some of these questions. So geospatial modeling, probabilistic modeling, and as well as process type modeling. And I work at a variety of scales, watershed, state, and global. Today, I'm going to just talk about one group of projects related to New York State. And we developed a greenhouse gas inventory for the state. New York State has passed very ambitious climate legislation that requires, for example, net zero emissions by 2050. So we've analyzed what are the emissions from agriculture in New York State. And the bar graph shows at the bottom that enteric fermentation is by far the largest source category, and working our way up, manure storage, both methane and nitrous oxide. Again, echoing Dominic's point that we need to look at all the greenhouse gases together, very important, especially because we have carbon and nitrogen cycling so closely together. Again, echoing Dominic's point, agricultural soils here, especially CO2, are quite a small source of emissions, nitrous oxide a bit higher. And the pie chart is just, again, emphasizing that most of the emissions are methane. And that's because we have such a lot of livestock in New York State. We also try to quantify greenhouse gas emission opportunities. So this is another analysis for the state. And reforestation we found to be the largest. That's because there are about 3 million acres by our analysis of former agricultural land. Some large fraction of that could be reforested, storing a lot of carbon. Agricultural soil management, that's primarily improving nitrogen fertilizer management. So reducing fertilizer use, reducing all losses from the field, including nitrous oxide, but maintaining yields. So food waste is a bit of a placeholder here, just a nod that we need to be thinking about the whole system. So we do inventories by sector, but the way we manage things flow from one sector to another. So if we could reduce food waste substantially, think of all the upstream benefits. We are requiring all of that land, all those resources, all that nitrogen that are not needed to produce wasted food. So alley cropping is an idea of planting rows of trees between row crops. So again, trees are a theme here, that there's an opportunity to store carbon. And it looks like my time is up.
Thanks for getting together. Just because Toni called me out as having been awarded a NAS membership, I want to make very clear that this is really a team effort. I feel now singled out, but in a way that's a warped picture, because I'm working with a lot of students and a lot of faculty together, and I want to make also sure that others understand that when I arrived here 22 years ago in this department, this department as a young faculty member was tremendously supportive to me. I think I couldn't have done it without my faculty colleagues here feeling welcome and being accepted as a young person in this field, coming from another country, having never worked in the United States, having no roots here. Didn't know even what a credit is, and so I feel really happy that I can share that also with all of you. So I just want to make sure that that I can say that before I start. This is my only slide, so I should make up for this prelude. I want to introduce a few of the students that are working in this area. I parsed it out into four broad topics that I'm interested in to work on in the group and with collaborators. One is soil carbon, soil organic carbon mostly, to look at why it is there at very small scale. So we do stuff at very, very small scale. I have some students such as Lee and Morgan that look at as fine as you can imagine, pushing the envelope on X-ray spectroscopy. Rachel working on aspects of microbial and molecular diversity, but also spinning it up into larger scale modeling, knowing these effects and incorporating them into models to say something about the global or regional scale with a lot of other people. We have a new institute at Cornell that's called the AI Climate. So it's an AI institute funded by NIFA. And I want to have a lot of discussion. Some of you are already aware of that and are already part of that, but I want to draw many more people into that and see what we can do better using AI at all scales in terms of agricultural and forestry management using computational tools. I'm very interested in biochar, as most of you already know, and have been exposed to from things such as plant-plant communication to global scale effects, to also interactions with rock weathering, recycling of nutrients as part of sanitation, especially in East Africa, looking at the opportunities. But also here locally on a dairy farm, we're just commissioning a pyrolysis unit on an upstate New York dairy farm, as well as small-scale investigations of the opportunities to recycle. And the last area is I'm very interested in leveraging the humanities, both in my teaching as well as in my research, to understand how can we ask better questions, how can we investigate and build teams better with looking at what the arts are doing on the other side of the campus. Thank you very much.
I'm Dan Buckley. So I'm a soil microbiologist. Some of you might know me because I'm also the director of the MPS program here in SIPS. My research program looks at very small things. So we're interested in microbial ecology. My real focus is on what microbes do. Microbes are 4 billion years old. They've been around much longer than plants. So most plants are sharing an ancestor maybe 400 million years old. So microbes do things that plants can't. They maintain a lot of the essential support systems that make our planet work. And when plants want to do these things, they often partner with the microbes, which is why one of the things that roots often do is trying to find nutrients. They're working with those microbes in the soil. So we want to know what the microbes are doing. But that also means we need to understand how soils operate. We need to understand how the plants operate, because it's really a three-part system, right? Plant, microbe, and soil working together. So we're interested in how microbes get to where they're going to be found and what they're doing there. So that involves biogeography. So this is ecological and evolutionary. What causes the microbes to be in the place where you find them? How do they disperse? But also, how do our man-made interventions alter them? So if I till the soil, if I plant one crop or another, how does that change who's there? We're interested in how they change. So they can evolve more quickly than plants and animals do. And that evolution affects what they're doing in the environment. So we want to understand how quickly they change, what makes them change. We're also very interested in what they do, not just who's there, but what their roles are. So we focus a lot on the carbon cycle. So we're interested in the formation of soil carbon and also its destruction. And microbes are essential to both of these processes, and releasing nutrients from carbon, which is, of course, important to plants. So we want to know specifically what microbes are doing, which processes. And also, we're interested in their role in the nitrogen cycle. So these are two very important things for soil fertility, and they're foundational to soil health. So we're interested as well in what are microbial contributions to soil health, not just as indicators, which I think they are useful indicators, but also mechanistically, how do they underlie the foundation of soil health? And of course, all of this comes back to plants as well. So they're super diverse, just to throw that out there. We often have students isolating and describing new species. We name new species, which is a fun thing that a lot of biologists don't get to say. And so we're constantly discovering new phenomena that maybe haven't been seen before. So if you have something weird going on in your system, let us know. We collaborate broadly. We're working in agricultural systems as well as in forest ecosystems. We've collaborated with people who are working on fungi, with pawpaw trees. So if you want to know what the microbes are doing in your system, let us know. Maybe we can help. And our primary interest ultimately is sort of making that link between who's there and what they're doing. We use a lot of sophisticated genomic techniques. We use a lot of stable isotopes to try to map function back onto microorganisms. A lot of what we do ends up revolving around studying DNA sequences, because many of these organisms are basically invisible and really hard to see or to grow in the lab. And so we pull out their DNA and study what they're doing from that. So I think I'll wrap it up there, and I think Ying is next.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ying. I'm an associate professor in soil and crop science. So I wish I could have done this last year. So, so this is a general overview of what my lab is doing. So we aim to answer two fundamental questions. The first one is to understand how the natural ecosystem and also managed systems, like the agriculture systems, that respond to climate change, variability, and climate extremes, and also how these processes can feed back to the climate change. The second question we aim to answer is to how we can monitor and predict the interaction between climate, biosphere, and also hydrological cycles, so that we can better inform policymaking. So to answer the questions, my lab collaborates with economists, with computer scientists, and also engineers. So from this graph on the left, you can see that the skills my lab is doing is actually very diverse, from the really the molecular level to all the way to the globe. So here I try to make this 4 quadrant here to give you some examples of what we're doing. So from the theory side, here, not sure where I can, this upper quadrant here, we try to develop new equations at the molecular level to model photosynthesis from the light reaction side. And we try to couple that with the transpiration and also evaporation in order to better understand the interaction between carbon and water cycle. And we use a lot of data. If you look at this quadrant upper here, we try to both develop sensing technology and sensing technology at the in situ level. For example, at the leaf scale and also cannabis scale, we have UAV, we have different towers, and we also use different types of airborne and satellite data sets to understand the interaction between carbon, water, and also climate. So you can see we use different data sets here at the leaf level and at the canopy level, and also the regional and global level. We also develop and run model simulations here in order to predict the past and the future, again, focusing on the biosphere and its interaction with hydrological cycle and also climate change. So the one example here is that we try to understand how the agriculture systems, especially the interaction of G by E by M, how that can feed back to the climate system in the historical period. We were also trying to understand how the atmospheric CO2 changes, also climate change, impact the trend of global productivity, evapotranspiration, and also water use efficiency. So we also do a lot of applications with these modeling and data tools guided by our theory. So one example is like we try to understand the food, water, and climate sustainability in China and also in Africa. So lastly, I would like to have this graphical illustration of what we do. We basically try to harness the theory and the data across different scales in order to inform applications in ecological monitoring, forecasting, and also agriculture management and monitoring. So these are the sponsors for my program. That's all I have. Yeah, thanks.
I'm Allison Chatrchyan, and I may be the only social scientist in your department. I'm a research and teaching RTE faculty member here at Cornell. I've been here 10 years Before that, I was in the extension system in Dutchess County. And I want to tell you about a few of the research and extension projects that I've worked on. It's super nice to be in this department. I'm really excited. I studied ecology at Colby College and political science, and my PhD is in international environmental politics and policy. So I've always worked at the interaction between stakeholders, environmental and agriculture issues, and policies. So I'm most excited to be joining Dr. Johannes Lehmann on this new NSF AI Institute grant that we brought to Cornell, and I'm going to be heading up the education and extension work with Bruce Erickson at Purdue and working with the full team on some focus groups and surveys and stakeholder assessment. And that's a 5-year project, so that's really exciting. I was brought into that team because I've been working with Dr. Art DeGaetano since I've been at Cornell for 10 years and developed with him the Climate Smart Farming program at Cornell. And we developed decision support tools, which are on climatesmartfarming.org, and an extension team that's out in the state working with farmers. I conducted focus groups that have published some articles with a postdoc on views of farmers on climate change. And we conducted a statewide survey that I'm hoping to get published soon. Another project I've done, I was PI on a NIFA project to develop a climate stewards program in New York State that is up and running. Last year, we trained 9 county extension offices on climate change and about a total of 100 new volunteers across the state that work with their municipality on climate change. I'm also co-PI on a NIFA project with the University of Maryland that looks at solar leases. And we've conducted focus groups and we'll be working to get that data published. I guess finally, I'm lead author with Deborah Aller on the new New York State Climate Impacts Assessment, which should be released this fall. I co-authored the agriculture chapter with her. Several Cornellians contributed to that, and that should be a really important document. I used the last climate report that Dave Wolfe led many times in my work, and this is an update of that. And this time we focused on climate justice, underserved farmers, and really trying to identify adaptation practices that farmers could adopt. I don't have one more minute. I'm also working on a USDA climate adaptation project. I'm super excited. We're working with dairy farmers this year to teach them about climate change and have them develop an adaptation and mitigation plan. So thank you so much.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.